From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is what we have on the program, Juncker Exclusive. The Commission President criticizes the new migration post, protecting our European way of life. Part-time Europeans, the problem with Brits, according to Mr. Juncker, and who's to blame for Brexit. Populist retreat, all smiles and a red carpet welcome for Italy's government, minus Matteo Salvini. Disinfo epidemic, the battle against the anti-vax movement sets its sights on social media. And farewell, Mr. Juncker, the best moments of the Commission President in tonight's Raw Moment. All right, it is time to meet our panelists tonight. We have Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. So, Darren, we have this big Juncker interview. Which part of it are you most interested in?
Well, just picking up on the Brexit bit, I think thankfully for Britons, they found out they're not going to run out of toilet paper, even in the worst case, no-deal Brexit. But I think Mr. Juncker summed up maybe the mood in much of Europe that actually Britain's never been fully on board with the European project and essentially have been part-time Europeans.
I wonder how that will go down in the UK. All right, also joining us tonight, Morten Løkkegaard. He's a Danish MEP and vice chair of the Renew Group. Well, what about you, Morten?
I'm also looking forward to listen to what Juncker says about Brexit, but also I heard that he's going to say something on Mr. Orban. And we have a special interest in Mr. Orban in Denmark because we are very critical towards his whole way of, his whole attitude towards the European Union anyway. So.
All right, so we'll watch out for that part of the interview, Mr. Juncker. And also with us, Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield, a French MEP and vice chair of the Greens EFA Group. What about you, Gwendoline?
Well, I think I would like to comment on the European new way of life and the fact that Juncker criticized it, and it's a very good news that he did.
All right, okay, well, that's exactly where we're beginning tonight, our exclusive interview with Jean-Claude Juncker. The soon-to-be former president of the European Commission sat down with our correspondent Effie Kutsokosta today. In a wide-ranging interview, he spoke frankly about the key challenges facing Europe, from Brexit to migration and populism. But he began by weighing in on a story that has blown up this week, as Gwendoline was saying, the renaming of the Commission post in charge of migration to protecting our European way of life. Let's take a look.
There is a lot of controversy around new portfolios and new names of the portfolios, especially the one that Mr. Schinas is expected to get, this protecting the European way of life. Do you agree with this term?
No.
What is a European way of life for you?
A European way of life is putting together our main talents and energies. And included in that room is the fact that you have to respect the others, independently from their color and independently from their initial home state. Knowing Margaritis well, because I was in daily contact with him, I know that the title is not corresponding to his own values. And I think that this will have to be changed.
So, as the President-elect said, it's about migration, but of course you don't agree that we should be, a European way of life should be protected.
I don't like the idea to oppose the European way of life to migration. No, accepting those coming from far away in Europe is part of the European way of life. It should be precised.
But let's stick with migration, as it was an issue that dominated your time in office, and it continues to dominate the agenda. So do you feel that you lost control of the situation?
I myself know, but member states have lost the control. When I was campaigning back in 2014, I was bringing the attention of the general public to the migration issue, because it was foreseeable that something would happen. In 2015, the Commission made proposals, mainly as far as resettlement and relocation are concerned. This was a decision by the Council of Interior Ministers, but some 3, 4, 5 countries are not accepting the rule the Council was giving to them. When I'm having a look in the Hungarian press, the Commission is criticized, but in fact, the members have to be criticized. They took the decision, it was a right decision, and it's not a controversy between the Commission and Hungary and others. It's a controversial material between the Council, Member States, and some of the Member States.
Did all this way of responding to this crisis, and also Merkel's reaction to open the doors of Germany, did all
She
this...
didn't open the doors, she did not close the doors. That's the difference.
But did this help leaders like Salvini rise, finally, in Europe?
Where is Mr. Salvini now?
I think he left the government.
He left the government, okay. Good news.
He's not the only one, though.
No, but it's too easy to develop a demagogic speech, discourse, explanation, argumentation. These are poor people. Not all of them are entitled to stay in Europe. There we have a real problem, because it's difficult to manage the returns to the countries of origin. But the fact that in Hungary, in Italy, some are saying that the policy of my Commission would be to open the doors broadly for Islam terrorists is, in fact, a sin. It's a sin.
All right, so no hesitation there. The first question on whether or not you agreed with that name. You were watching that, the European way of life. You said no, quite adamantly, no. Did you expect that reaction from him?
Yes, I'm not that surprised. I think that Europe is also, we have fights about economic issues or on even on the migration. Some of us want to open more than others, but I do think that the core politicians in the European Union are people that have the idea that openness is one of the biggest values. So no, I'm not surprised. I'm happy that he did it, because if he hadn't, it would be very worrying.
And for a predecessor to say that before, you know, the successor takes over, is that a wrong foot forward on von der Leyen's part?
Well, you could say so. I mean, it's always discussed the style here. I mean, I think everyone would be a bit frustrated if a man like Juncker is saying a thing like this just a few days after one has come up with the first proposal. But anyway, I can follow the critics because, I mean, for me, it's mostly semantic. I mean, this title is confusing. I mean, what is we talking about? What is protecting? I mean, how does that inflect the migration situation? It's not very precise.
Or what kind of message it sends? And as you know, some people have used the words dog whistle or the kind of pandering to the right.
Yeah, they say it's outrageous. I think one MEP said they were very upset and alarmed by the use of this term. Now, it must be said that Ursula von der Leyen used these very words in her speech.
Exactly.
And it was the title of her speech to the European Parliament, a couple of months ago. I mean, no one raised an eyebrow then. However, clearly there's an awful lot of pressure now on her to try and change tack. There were rumours last night that she had decided to ditch this title. I think now the pressure probably is too great from both Parliament and indeed for some people inside the Commission that eventually she will. Because ultimately those questions are raised, which is
and what's
what is a
interesting is that
European way of
Juncker
life,
also
and what
brought
are you
up
trying to protect her
Skinas's
against?
point of view, right?
Well, of course, and they worked very closely together. He was his spokesperson for years.
Sure.
So I would expect that over the next couple of days, maybe the next week, that we will see a change on this.
But just to say that it's not only that word. I mean, that's why I think Juncker had to react.
Sure.
And it's also maybe because of that we didn't have the same reaction this time that when there was the speech, because it's also demography and democracy, which is a very worrying word together. All sort of terminology in the entire
so will
Commission.
this name get through? What do you think? Do you think this name is going to get through? Will they change the name?
Well, I think they will.
You both think?
I heard that already yesterday, and I think that most of our leaders agree that we have to take up this discussion again and change some bits. But can I just get back to the point that you rightly made? I mean, this was also a part of her program, the text that we were actually achieving when she had the speech. And so one can see that she followed all the titles are totally related to this text. So no one could be surprised. I think that already then some of us said, well, this is a bit fussy. I mean, she will have to be more concrete when it comes to the.
But it's just a reminder that language still matters.
It matters.
Yeah,
and I do want to point out something else that he said there. He said member states lost control. That implies that it's the countries, not necessarily his commission. Do you agree with that? And how do you interpret what he said? It's the member states that lost control of migration.
I interpreted it by the fact that at one moment, Commission and Parliament, with a majority, did try to get to a relocation and to the idea that we have to share this and welcome these people all over Europe, and that it's not only a few countries that have to take care of it. And at that time, the member states were the ones that refused it when the Parliament and the Commission were trying to be more progressive on this idea. So that's how I interpret it. And once again, I would be agreeing with him on this.
Morten is a bit more skeptical.
Now, I was just saying, of course, this is true. You can look at the facts, and this is true. But on the other hand, Juncker also bears big responsibility. I mean, he's the Commission leader. He has been traveling around for years. He had the power. At one point, he had the power actually to try to convince these leaders, but he didn't manage to do that. And of course, that's a political responsibility. You can't run away from that.
But it is also, well, just on migration, there's this also constant battle about, should the control of one country's borders essentially be up to member states, or this battle about how powerful do we want the Commission to become? Because that is another potential area. If we've got Brussels essentially telling countries, when to open and close borders, is an area that many Europeans will feel uncomfortable.
And just very quickly, was there really a difference between what he said, difference between not closing the door and opening the door when it came to Angela Merkel's policy? Is there really a difference?
For me, there's one, and that's where I would not agree with him, is that indeed I agree with the sentence. Angela didn't open the door. She just didn't block them like other countries did. And now we could maybe open a bit more sometimes.
Okay. All right. Well, during his time at the top of EU politics, Jean-Claude Juncker has gone head-to-head with leaders, most notably, perhaps, Hungary's Viktor Orban. Euronews' Effie Kutsakosta asked Mr. Juncker if Mr. Orban is a European democratic leader. Let's take a look.
He's an Hungarian leader.
Which means?
Which means that his first concern is not Europe, but his country. And that is a major mistake. If you are only interested in your country, if you are feeding with sentiments which do exist in your country without taking care of the broader European context, then you are not a European leader, but you are a national leader.
But how do you feel that the former justice minister, for example, of Hungary was offered a portfolio of enlargement and neighborhood? That means that he has to also safeguard all the rule of law and this thing. What kind of a message is this?
I was not appointing him.
So you disagree with this decision?
No. I will never criticize the new president of the Commission because I know the difficulties of the job. But we will see in the European Parliament if this is agreeable or not.
Donald Trump, he called you as a nasty and brutal killer.
Yeah.
How would you describe him?
No, I took this as a compliment because he was saying different things. He was saying, I love Jean-Claude. Nobody in Europe is saying, I love Jean-Claude. Certainly not my good friend Viktor Orban. He was saying that I'm a tough negotiator, and during a press conference we had at the Rose Garden, he was saying, I would prefer Jean-Claude being the negotiator for the US than to be the negotiator for Europe. This is a series of compliments.
Tell me one word that you would describe Donald Trump.
Outspoken.
And your successor, Ursula von der Leyen, do you think she's the first female president of the EU Commission? But is her nomination a blow to any effort that the EU has done to democratically legitimize the EU leadership?
I like Ursula. I know her for, I think, 20 years. We had a regular contacts. She's okay. But the way she was brought in the office was not highly transparent. And the European Parliament did not play its role. The European Parliament was always claiming that only a Spitzenkandidat should become president of the Commission, and the European Parliament was not playing its role, and it was accepting, by the way, that the European Council was directly appointing two vice presidents of the Commission, and that is not the business of the European Council. They tried it with me, I refused that.
You know what, in many ways we're going to miss Jean-Claude Juncker. At one point, I'm not going to criticise my successor and then spend most of the interview criticising his successor.
Well,
she's okay.
Yeah.
She's okay.
Thank you very much.
You heard his comment on Viktor Orban. He pretty much has said, well, he's Hungarian. That's what he is.
Yeah, and I think on this point, I actually think he's quite modest because he could he could feel tempted to be very, very critical toward Mr. Orban. I think that in the case of Orban, I think Juncker has shown some really statesmanship and been very, very patient, actually like an angel sometimes. So I think that this is very modest. This is very moderate. I think the comments he had is almost friendly.
Oh.
But is that not a criticism that actually that is one area where the Commission should have been stronger and that Orban has been given too much freedom to essentially abuse the rule of law?
Yes,
totally.
and I mean, I think he's much too moderate, and you know, maybe he should spend less time criticizing Ursula von der Leyen and more Viktor Orban, because I mean, he's not. He doesn't even say that he doesn't really think it's a good idea to have this minister, ex-minister of Justice.
But do you think he was implying
yes,
he was
okay, he meant it, but on, you know, as you said, he's much more outspoken on Ursula von der Leyen than he is on Viktor Orban. And I think this is a guilty way of doing of a lot of our head of states, and people should really say something a bit stronger on the case.
But on
it would help sometime.
On the other hand, I mean, this is the reality of life. I mean, if he was going to criticize the choice, I mean, he could criticize almost everyone. I mean,
and he was also criticizing the way she got it, not her as a person. He said she's okay, but also the way she got it. And he pointed out Parliament did not play its role.
Yeah, that's also a fact which we have to take into consideration. But I mean, again, he's playing the game. I mean, in 14, if you remember 14, it was like he was appointed the way he was appointed. It looked like the Spitzenkandidat system worked, but it did not. I mean, this is a hypocrisy. I think that at that point in time, the Parliament and the member states agreed on Juncker, and that was the easy part. Now, in 19. They have to follow up and show that we had even more to say, and this is there's a big theatre in this.
But it shows that we really need to have a better system. I mean, I think that's
and I have
what
to say,
we all
I think
learned.
from the point of view that, you know, we're in the European Parliament here, but, I mean, at the end of the day, if it was a choice for most Europeans in trying to recognise whether it was Manfred Weber or Ursula von der Leyen, I mean, they don't know who either of these two people are, and this is where European politics needs to change in a degree, that connection, even though 50% of people, for the first time in decades, turns out to vote in these European elections, you know, the leadership still of Europe beyond nation states is just not there.
This Spitzenkandidaten thing, first we should change the name, because in any other language as French, as German, you can understand it, and in France or Italy, this is completely unknown process.
Also in Denmark.
So that's Denmark. So that's the first thing, but it will not work if you don't have other things with it. Transnational list, more power of parliament, more initiative.
The system has to change.
The system has to change. Only counting on Spitzenkandidaten to be the solution to have a democratic system is not convincing.
I must just in a slight contradiction to that, or to give the opposing view, of course, lots of citizens would prefer that it is their nation states and their leaders that make the decision, who choose who the Commission President is, and not necessarily transnational MEPs. But that's a whole other
conversation right there. Okay,
indeed.
Coming up on Raw Politics, part-time Europeans. What Mr. Juncker has to say about Brits, Brexit, and what he thinks about Theresa May. Our exclusive interview continues after the break. Plus, we also have Italy's government. He may have pushed out the far right, but is Brussels celebrating a little too soon? Welcome back to Raw Politics and our exclusive interview with outgoing EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. When we talk about his legacy, it's impossible not to talk about Brexit. Under his watch, the UK voted to leave the European Union in a historic referendum. So how does he look back on that decision? Let's take a look.
Do you consider Brexit as the biggest failure of your term, that you didn't manage to keep a country in the bloc for the first time?
It's a tragedy and it's a failure, but I have to say I don't think that this is mine. Because I didn't decide to have this referendum. I was not intervening in the referendum explanation because Prime Minister Cameron asked me not to intervene, because this has to be considered as an inner British problem. We had negotiated an agreement with Cameron on different points. This agreement with Cameron didn't play any role during the referendum campaign. The British were told for more than 40 years that yes, they are in, but they don't want to share all the policies which have been decided by the European Union. The British, since the very beginning, were part-time Europeans. What we need are full-time Europeans, and it's this Brexit from its genesis. Is that English genesis?
Yeah, it's Greek.
Maybe it's Greek. Has to do with the fact that not a single government was openly defending and explaining the place of Britain in the European Union. And if you are telling the people over decades that this is not exactly what we wanted, don't be surprised if a referendum is answered in a negative way. By the way, I was probably the only one who was not surprised by the outcome. I was.
That.
Yeah, I expected that because this matraquage, as the French are saying, repeating day after day that okay, we are there, but we don't want to be there, is producing obvious results.
But seeing the chaos right now in the United Kingdom, should Britain leave the bloc finally?
Yeah, that's a decision to be taken by our British friends. My impression is that they want to leave, according, by the way, to the result of the referendum. But this is a lose-lose situation. More losses for Britain, but also losses for the rest of the European Union.
Your colleague, EU Council President Donald Tusk, has spoken of a special place in hell for those who didn't have a plan to carry out Brexit safely. Is there such a place for whom? David Cameron, Boris Johnson, or Theresa May?
By opposition to my good friend Donald Tusk, I don't believe in hell.
But if there is somebody to blame for this situation...
No, but I wouldn't put someone in hell because they were doing their best, mainly Theresa May. We negotiated not a deal with Theresa May, but a treaty. This expression, deal, is not reflecting the ambition of the text, it's a treaty. And she did well, and I would have liked the British Parliament to accept this withdrawal agreement. Things would be easier.
Well, joining us for this discussion is Shafak Mohammed, a British MEP from the Renew Group. We also have Jutta Gutteland, a Swedish MEP from the Socialists and Democrats Group. And still with us, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. Okay, Shafak, I'll start with you. Mr. Juncker said tragedy and failure, that's Brexit, but not his. Would you put any responsibility on his commission, or do you agree with him?
Look, I mean, Brexit is a tragedy. It's really disappointing where we are. I don't want to be apportioning blame. I think I want to look forward in terms of what we can do, not looking backwards. I'm playing a full role here in the European Parliament. My party is. I take issue with him when he talks about part-time Europeans. You know, as Liberal Democrats, we've always been the most pro-European party in the United Kingdom. Our leader, Nick Clegg, when he was in the coalition, Deputy Prime Minister, you know, he spoke 5 European languages, you know, his mother was Dutch.
But are there part-time Europeans in your country?
Well, look, you could argue that there's part-time Europeans in every country in that sense. There's always going to be some nationalists, as we've seen, that have entered this parliament. But hey, our direction of travel has always been that we've always wanted to be part of Europe, and that's why we're still leading the charge to remain in Europe. So, you know, at the European elections, you know, we got 1 million more votes than the Labour Party. You know, at the moment, Lib Dems have got more MEPs than the Conservatives and Labour combined.
Right, and Jutta, do you think from the outside that, as Mr. Juncker was saying, the UK was never really part completely of the Union, that they are part-time Europeans? Do you agree with him?
No, I don't. I had my experience, and I know I share it with many from my Swedish colleagues, and also the citizens feel that we had a great cooperation with the UK, and I feel very sad about the development now, and I don't want this blame game. I don't think that will help, and I also find it a bit disturbing that he used that word. I don't think that will help. I know many British citizens who are really sorry about this, but on the other hand, I'm very worried about what the Prime Minister is doing. I'm very skeptical towards his way of addressing the situation.
And
I think it is actually slightly outrageous on 2 points what Juncker has just said. First of all, taking no responsibility for Brexit whatsoever. I mean, in part, if a member state, if someone wants to leave any club and essentially you're in charge of that club, well, you have to take some form of responsibility for your inability to keep them in. Now, this Euroscepticism in Britain has existed for a long time. Juncker is right in saying that it predates his commission, but it happened under his watch. He has to take some form of responsibility.
You think he could have done something more, or his commission could have done something?
Isn't it weird that his proudest achievement apparently is keeping Greece inside the EU and the Eurozone, and he's taking no responsibility for Brexit? You can't have, to quote, your cake and eat it. And second of all, I mean, part-time European, what does that mean? I mean, that means part-time European of what he views it to be European, i.e. his impression of the European political project, which lots of Britons haven't bought into, but it must be said, lots of other people in lots of other European countries have not done as well. One of the reasons that maybe his commission have failed to grapple with the rise of populism or Euroscepticism in Italy, in France, in Hungary and elsewhere.
Okay, but then to defend him a little bit then, I need to complicate it. I can also kind of understand that after he feels he's going out, he wants to share what's he thinking as a person and not only as the leader of Europe.
So you mean being a bit more frank now?
Yes,
now that he's,
and he feels frustrated, and that's human. And he feels like, okay, why did I end up with this? I wanted to do certain things.
But he did have positive things to say, which is on Theresa May. He said she did a good job.
It did, but I'm just going back to this part-time Europeans. I think he's been hanging around with too many Eurosceptic kind of politicians, you know, whether it was Boris Johnson, David Davis or others. And I think, you know, what he needed to do was actually reach out to the Remain campaigners within our country as well, and to say that actually they are people now that after the Brexit vote have now come together. You know, before we just took Europe for granted in the sense that we were all Europeans. And now we've realised, actually, this is something very precious for us, and that's why we're marching and campaigning week in, week out to remain in the European Union, and that's why we're not giving up.
But you know what's interesting is he actually said that he wasn't surprised that Brexit happened, and right now the feeling...
Hang on, so he must have known it.
Well, no, I think on that point, I think he has got a point, which is that, you know, he always argued that if you essentially slag off the European Union Monday to Saturday, which is what lots of British politicians did, and then on Sunday, which David Cameron tried to do, say, well, actually, sorry, it's not that bad at all. How can you expect people to trust you on that message? So I think he's got a point that Euroscepticism is something that has gone on for decades in Britain.
And on
not
that
point,
actually, Darren, when you know different leaders saying, "Oh, it's going to be really bad," it's not that bad. Well, now we have actually the Yellow Hammer document. Let's just talk about that a little bit. What is it? It's that report that came out, the government assessment of the worst case scenario. And so, So let's just go to that. What is it?
So it is a document that the government have been forced to publish that was leaked in one of the papers a couple of weeks ago. Now, some are saying it is a kind of scenario of what happened. The government are saying it is the worst case scenario.
It's pretty terrible. The picture
it means that there will be long queues at the ports, most notably Dover, which is the main entry point, that there will not be a shortage of water.
But there will be a shortage of medicine.
Could be in the long term. There will be shortages of certain medicines. There will be a lack of fresh fruit and veg, potentially, and higher prices, both in supermarkets and for your electricity and energy. And that also it will create further political instability in Northern Ireland. So the government argue this is the worst-case scenario. Others would suggest it is essentially what is likely to happen if there is a no-deal Brexit. And this is all in the case of a no-deal Brexit. But the UK government would always determine that these would be short-term bumps and that the medium and long-term would be...
I have a question, but go ahead, you two.
Yeah, but to be a bit consequent here, Juncker didn't want Brexit, and he had to deal with it. Boris, he wants Brexit, but now he got this report saying that this is a catastrophe for his country. So he should deal with the fact that it actually will hurt the citizens and try to have some rethink.
Yeah, well, with this report, it paints the worst-case scenario. Do you think people still believe this in the sense that it's been going on for years? They've been given different scenarios. At some point, people were stockpiling. But do people now still believe the government, trust the government?
I think it's dawning on people what no-deal Brexit could mean, and people are realising that. I mean, prior to coming to Parliament, I used to work in the retail sector. I knew the just-in-time systems that we had in place, particularly for fresh fresh fruit and veg. We never stored anything in the warehouses. It was always on the shelves, and then we relied upon a daily delivery in the morning, and similarly with other foods. I mean, you've got to look at the reaction sometimes that happens in Britain. When a few flakes of snow fall, we have panic buying of milk and bread. And, you know, I really do fear that, you know, if we have these log jams at Calais and at Dover, that we, you know, our country will ground to a halt, and then there will be shortages, and that's not good for our economy.
Okay.
It's not
Quick
good for
point
our
before we
society.
have to move on.
And the people didn't vote for that. They voted for something else. They didn't vote to have a catastrophe in the country. So
It must be said that kind of the two dividing lines is, A, if you're a Brexiteer, you see this as essentially Project
Right.
Fear, and if you're a Remainer, you can understand why a government would allow this to happen
So there you go.
in 2019.
And in general,
That's the
there's a lot of...
dividing line.
There you go. That divide is still in the UK. OK, well, from Brexit to the financial crisis and the rise of populism, you can watch Euronews' exclusive interview, which you saw a bit of Jean-Claude Juncker in full. That's tonight at 8:30 Central European Time, 7:30 if you are in the UK and Ireland, only here on Euronews. OK, we have a lot more on the program for you. Fighting anti-vaxxers. Now, political and tech leaders join forces to find that disinformation happening in that sector. That's coming up next. Welcome back to the program. Now let's turn our attention to Italy, because freshly reappointed Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte was here in Brussels yesterday, and he received a very warm welcome. A red carpet was rolled out and hugs were exchanged with the European Council President Donald Tusk. Conte has also met with the Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and incoming President Ursula von der Leyen. Now, the visit symbolized the new pro-European government's change of attack towards Brussels after more than a year of fighting over budget and migration. Right, joining us here in the studio to talk about this, we have Ignacio Corrao, an Italian MEP with the Five Star Movement, and Isabel Santos, a Portuguese MEP with the Socialists and Democrats group, and Darren is still with us. I will start with you, Ignacio. You know, this warming of relations with Brussels, rolling out the red carpet, handshakes, isn't it a bit too early for celebrations at this point? I mean, nothing has been done, and Matteo Salvini, is still very popular in Italy.
Well, let's say that Giuseppe Conte is not the Prime Minister of Italy for the first time. He's been the Prime Minister for the last 15 months. He's been working closely with the major figures here in the European institutions. He has a very good relationship with Donald Tusk. He's been working closely with the other leaders. And of course, probably with this new coalition, it's going to be easier for him to get this relationship than with the coalition.
And to get things done, I mean, is that enough? Or this
Speaking of things done, we have problems where other countries are not really eager to solve, because when it comes to migration issues, which is one of the biggest one with economics issues, the problem is that when we talk about economical migrants that arrive to Italy, this is not something that the other states want to talk about. So it's very complicated. You can have very good relationship, but the problem is not going to be solved easily.
Do you think there's a bigger messaging here with all this pomp and, you know, welcome Giuseppe Conte in terms of populism and taking back the reins?
Let's see. This is a moment of hope for everybody, for those who believe in liberal democracy and for those that are struggling in European Union for democratic values. This is a window of opportunity, and we must face this window together. Don't leave Italy
So you think you should shout
alone.
about it?
This is a moment of responsibility, of great responsibility, and we need great solidarity. Because, of course, Italy is facing two huge problems, migration and a stagnant economy. They will face in a very near time the challenge of budget.
Budget, for sure.
And we must be together to face these challenges. It's not time for troikas and blind atmosphere of...
So it sounds like it's such a positive start, but here we go again. Good start, and then...
I mean, there's undoubtedly relief in Brussels that, you know, Italy's not facing an election and they're not facing potentially a Salvini with a majority in Italy. So there's definitely relief. However, first of all, let's not get away from the fact that he still remains incredibly popular in Italy, that this coalition is fragile to say the least.
Yeah.
And that those massive issues of kind of budget constraints and migration still remains, and that ultimately, you know, they've still got the ability to bring down this coalition government. And I also think it's a little bit difficult for Brussels to kind of view this as some type of success when ultimately, yes, what it has done is it's forced other parties who've not worked together in the past, and we've actually seen this in the UK as well, with kind of Parliament somehow inserting itself through these strange coalitions. But you're not dealing with, and Brussels is not dealing with, the angst and
the reality on the ground, maybe,
that has led people to vote for people like Matteo Salvini.
I will ask the question again, because putting, you know, what Darren put forward, are we celebrating a little too early? Is Brussels celebrating a little too early?
I mean, seeing the things from the perspective of Brussels, of course, there is something to celebrate, because the coalition with the Democratic Party is a coalition that they can work together with very easily.
In Brussels, but on the ground.
Speaking about the ground, we have to see how things will develop in the next months. I mean, I'm positive, and I'm not sure about the popularity of Salvini, because Salvini was using, you know, this huge propaganda using the ministers. Now people are quite quite a deception with his attitude in the government, because he had the chance to change things from the government, and is just, you know, running away from responsibility. This is something that Italians feels. So what I think that if we keep on working and the other countries of the European Union help Italy on growing together, this is a great chance to
so it's a chance to change the direction.
A European boost in one of the most important countries.
And as Isabel mentioned, hope there, the word that she brought up. Okay, well, political and health leaders were in Brussels today meeting with social media giants, and they are joining forces to fight misinformation as a global anti-vax movement grows. Shauna Davis, our team in The Cube, have this update for us.
Health professionals and politicians coming together in Brussels with one key message, and that is that vaccines work. Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the European Commission, kicked off this conference saying that it is unacceptable that in the 21st century our children are still succumbing to diseases that should have been eradicated in Europe long ago. And this joint conference with the European Commission and the World Health Organization comes at a pivotal moment, and that's because there's been an increase in the number of vaccine-preventable diseases. We've already seen 4 countries this year, the UK and Greece, within Europe, that have been stripped of their measles-free status. But one of those key talking points when it comes to this conference is vaccine hesitancy. We wanted to know what that meant, so we talked to Professor Julie Leask. She's an expert in it, to see what it is and why it's been happening.
Mistrust in the system, just sheer concern about the safety of vaccines, or a bad experience with the healthcare system. And when parents embark on that journey of wondering whether they should vaccinate their child, they will sometimes go online. So that's why the discussion about social media platforms and their accountability around this issue is so important to.
Well, social media is that key talking point, and some companies have taken action. In fact, joining up with the World Health Organization, Facebook is one of those. So if you take your phone and if you type in vaccines, Facebook is going to urge you to go to the World Health Organization site so that you can get scientifically backed information. But some people say that social media companies aren't going far enough, and one of those people is Simon Harris, the Health Minister in Ireland. He's kicked off a plan this week called the Vaccine Alliance with parents and professionals in Ireland to try come together to boost the uptake of childhood vaccines. But at that conference, Simon Harris saying that hesitancy due to the spread of misinformation is a serious threat to public health. He's in fact urged companies to meet him to come up with a better solution. But vaccine hesitancy isn't the only reason why these diseases are on the rise. According to the World Health Organization today at this summit, they say a lot of the time it's simply because many people can't get access to these vaccines. They say 1 in 10 children born today don't receive basic vaccines. So this is a multi-layered issue that's facing Europe.
All right, so as we've seen there, you know, the anti-vax movement growing in Europe, and we have that big conference here. I'll go to you again, Ignacio, on this, because, you know, it has been linked to anti-vax movement with populism and the rise of it, and the distrust and mistrust of authority that lies at the heart of this, as Shauna was also saying. How is this? How is this issue to be tackled?
We had very difficult times with this issue in Italy, because we had in the previous government the Minister of Health, and she's been strongly attacked by this movement because she didn't do what they asked.
So who has responsibility?
The responsibility,
government, social media, who?
It's a very complex theme, and I think that only experts on the field could really explain. But what I think is when it comes to vaccination, the information, knowing what is important, what is necessary to do, it's fundamental. And what I think is there are too many people that don't really know what is important, what is not.
And that's what they're trying to talk about today in Brussels, also the role of information, the epidemic of disinformation, as they were saying. Okay, coming up on Raw Politics, the Commissioner for, quote, protecting the European way of life needs a name change. That's according to Jean-Claude Juncker. What do you think? Does it need a name change? Your call is coming up. We would like to know what you think. You could call us at 00800 3333 7002. Use the hashtag #RawPolitics on social media, and you can look for us on Skype as well. Our lines are opening soon.
Are you worried about a return to the Troubles in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I'm concerned. Sure, everyone's worried about a return to the Troubles.
A solution requires compromise.
We're not talking about a negotiation in which there are two parties that have to agree on something.
Does the European way of life need protecting?
The way I live my life is completely different to anybody else's way of life.
You're clearly suggesting that you are basically protecting your way of life from migrants and from migration.
What's wrong with the European way of life? I mean, in fact, that's the reason migrants come here, because they like the European way of life.
Well, those were the highlights from our show last night of Your Call, and we're doing it all over again tonight. So tune in and call at 7 p.m. Central European Time and 6 p.m. if you are in the UK and Ireland. So as most nights, we have Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, hosting the show tonight. He will also be joined by Jutta Gutteland, a Swedish MEP with the S&D, the Socialists and Democrats group, and still with us, Isabel Santos, a Portuguese MEP, also with the same group. So Darren, what are we talking about tonight?
Well, so we're going to pick up on that baton following what Jean-Claude Juncker said about the European way of life, our European way of life, and whether that Commission post should be changed. And also the thing that outrages me most, possibly, having now moved and living in Belgium, that you can't get free water in restaurants. It's terrible. Let's have a look. Dog whistle politics, anti-migrant sentiment. That's what the incoming EU Commission has been accused of with its new job title, Commissioner for, quote, protecting the European way of life. A post that oversees the migration file. And now the current Commission President is saying that the name should be changed.
I know that the title is not corresponding to his own values. And I think that this will have to be changed.
Is Jean-Claude Juncker right? Should protecting our European way of life post be changed? An island nation, Britain is used to standing alone. It took some time to get used to being part of Europe's club, and despite their special bond, Euroscepticism was never far away.
Passports back. We want our country back.
So when Brexit came along, was the rest of Europe surprised?
The British, since the very beginning, were part-time Europeans.
Tell us, Europe, does he have a point? Are Britons part-time Europeans? And welcome to Belgium, where the beer flows freely, but the tap water less so. The regional government of Wallonia now wants to introduce free water in public places and restaurants, but the service industry are strongly opposed. They say that free water will mean the loss of jobs. So we're asking, should restaurants be able to deny free water? Come on, Europe, have your say. Should protecting our European way of life post be changed? Are Britons part-time European? And should restaurants be able to deny free water? This is Your Call. You cannot not have a view on at least one of those topics. Do give us a call. It is free. 00800 333 3702. You can email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. Find us on Skype, or indeed, if you're on the Facebook, Twitter, social media, hashtag #RawPolitics.
All right, yes. Isabel, we're talking about, continuing on what Jean-Claude Juncker said about protecting our European way of life. Should that post name be changed? What do you think?
Yes, must be changed. It must be changed. Because what is European way of life? It's many ways of life. We have an integrative way of life. This is not a good title and must be
So there's no such thing as a European way of life, really?
No.
It doesn't exist?
It doesn't exist.
So it should be changed. You think it will be changed, like when it goes to Parliament and...
Yes, but it's as often in politics, when you use a sentence in a certain context, it gets a meaning, and that meaning is negative.
Yes.
When it says, stay out of here, if you don't like the way I behave, I don't like that. The values that we want to fight for are tolerance, to be able to live differently, and that sentence, in this context, will send the signal of the opposite. So that's why it should be changed.
So do you think the reaction that we've been seeing, we've been monitoring it for the last 2 days, the reaction was more, we don't really like this name?
Yeah,
Also from people,
I don't know anyone who's come out and said it's a really great one, and that the name itself should be...
And the interpretation
the name
of it
itself
as well.
should be protected. And I think ultimately they will have to change it. It is interesting, though, as I say, she did bring this up during her speech. There was very little controversy at the time. But the problem is, we don't quite understand what she means by it, because a Muslim woman in Paris has got a very different way of life from a German beer drinker in Bavaria.
Isn't that the point, that it's open to interpretation? That's why.
And the point is, which one are we protecting? And in those circumstances, you then get into, well, we don't really have a definable European way of life.
Yes.
So what are we protecting it from?
Yes. It's have this title in opposition to migration is something that is very strange, and it's not our way of life.
So as Darren was saying, you cannot have an opinion on any of the 3 topics.
There should be free tap water in restaurants.
Darren wants to talk about that, so do join us tonight after the programme. Well, for tonight's Raw Moment, as Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker prepares to step down after 5 years of leading the continent through some of its most turbulent times, let's take a minute to look back at some of our favourite moments.
The United Kingdom will always be a very close neighbor and partner. Les seuls qui se verraient renforcés sont les populistes et les nationalistes. Buongiorno, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, dear Peter. Je vais vous confier un secret. J'ai peu dormi cette nuit à cause de Madame May. Je porte le résultat d'un geste non intentionnel que j'ai commis ce matin.
Jean-Claude, my friend.
L'Europe était la grande affaire de ma vie. Oui, j'aime l'Europe et je continuerai de le faire. Merci de m'avoir écouté.
Are you going to miss Jean-Claude Juncker?
I think I actually will. I think they actually accomplished a lot during very difficult circumstances. We had crisis after crisis after crisis, and they delivered a lot. We had to push for many things, but still.
All right, and a word to describe Jean-Claude Juncker.
He is a real politician with brain, with heart,
and a sense of humour.
And sense of humour.
And charisma and a sense of humour.
Yes.
And actually, you know what? Us journalists are going to miss him, sorry, I should say, because actually he gives great quotes, great sound bites, and can be quite a lot of fun, which we'll see if Ursula von der Leyen will provide that too.
Let's see that. All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Stay tuned for your call. Get in touch with us. Darren is going to be waiting for you for that. Thank you again for joining us on Raw Politics. Have a good evening.